Hi everyone, and welcome to the Learning Campaign Cartographer 3 Plus tutorial video series. In this series, I aim to show you and teach you how to use the program Campaign Cartographer 3 Plus. And this series is aimed on beginner users who are just starting out with the program, but there will probably be some bits here as well that might be interesting for more experienced users. So this series will be presented as a set of rather short videos, where each video is intended to teach one concept. And the idea here is that after watching the entire series, you can go back, and if there's something you're unsure about, you didn't really understand or needed to refresh how to do that, you can go back to the relevant video and watch that again to familiarize yourself with that concept. So, of course, this series is all about the program Campaign Cartographer 3 Plus. We can see the main screen of the program here. This is how the program would look right after installing it. Now, in this first video, I'll be mainly talking a bit around the use of this program, a bit about the concepts, a bit about how you should familiarize yourself with the program. I'm not going too much into the program itself in this introduction video, but my next video in the series will talk about the user interface, and I will continue on from there with how to use the program, and I will alternate a bit between talking about concepts and how they work and doing some actual mapping in the program and showing you how to map. So during this tutorial series, we will be mapping a small landmass from start to finish. We will start by putting in the landmass and things like mountains and rivers and terrain and cities, roads, and so on. We'll be looking at how to add and work with effects and basically everything you need to do to complete your map. So, as I said, in this first video, I'm not going to show too much in the program itself. This is just an introduction to the series and a little bit what should you expect when you go into Campaign Cartographer 3 Plus. So, the first question, of course, then is, what is Campaign Cartographer 3 Plus? Some of you might just have bought this program, some of you may be wondering if you should buy this program, and some of you are experienced users who know everything about the program, obviously. But for the benefit of people curious about the program, then Campaign Cartographer 3 Plus is a map making program intended for making fantasy maps. It can make all kind of fantasy maps, including things like science fiction and modern maps, and more like the classical type of fantasy like Warhammer, Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder type of maps or type of setting, so on. And it can do a lot of different kind of maps. It's much what you make of it, I guess. But the basic package, if you haven't bought any add-ons and haven't added any resources or anything yourself, is basically a map making package for making overland fantasy maps. But there are a lot of add-ons available to add the functionality to draw cities, dungeons, and science fiction type of things like spaceships and modern type, for example, modern street views, and there's a lot of possibilities with Campaign Cartographer 3 Plus. And people use it for different purposes. Some people make maps for their role-playing games, and perhaps they print them out and show them to the players, or perhaps they import them into a virtual tabletop system and play online using that. Some people are authors and use Campaign Cartographer to make maps for their books. Some people also use it to make maps for board games and things like that. So it's basically all things fantasy mapping related. But before you start with Campaign Cartographer 3+, you should know a couple of important things that are nice to have in mind before you start. And the first thing is, Campaign Cartographer 3 is not an image editor. You may have worked with image editors before, like PaintShop Pro, Photoshop, Affinity Photo, or any of the lots of editors out there. And a lot of people, most people have experience with some kind of image editors. But Campaign Cartographer 3+ is not an image editor. Actually, it's based on a CAD program, computer assisted design, and this means that it works quite a bit different from your regular image editors. For example, in a regular image editor, you would do things like fill an area with color or paint with a brush. In Campaign Cartographer 3+, you usually work with what they call entities. That is, for example, shapes. You can define the polygonal shape, and then you set that shape to have a specific fill as a property. You don't fill it like an image editor, and then later you can move or change the shape or so of this entity. It's not like in an image editor where you take the eraser and you basically erase a few pixels here and there to get what you want. Here you work with entities that can be worked with, can be reshaped. You can change properties to change the fill style. For example, if you filled something with a forest-like fill style and you decide that that's not what you wanted at all, you can just change the property and say that, well, this entity should have a mountain-like fill style instead of the forest-like fill style, and so on. But the point here is you actually work with these entities. You don't work with individual pixels. You can't just pick up your eraser and erase just small parts of things, but you actually have to reshape the entity itself. So that's one of the things you need to know when you go into Campaign Cartographer. If your primary experience with map making and things like that before is using image editors, you will need to sit a little bit down and look at how is this done in Campaign Cartographer 3+. Do not try to take too much of that image editor baggage with you, because in most cases it's not going to help you too much in using Campaign Cartographer 3+. You're probably just going to get frustrated because you're trying to do the same thing you did in your image editor and then you can't do it, and things don't work out. So it's better to leave that knowledge a little bit aside and go in with a clean mind when you are starting out with Campaign Cartographer 3+. Another important aspect which follows from this is that also that when you work in Campaign Cartographer 3+, you are working with real-world distances, like miles, kilometers, meters, light years, whatever, but you're not working with pixels or inches. For example, when you work in an image editor, you might be very some important parts might be the size of the image and the resolution in pixel per inch. You might know that an image is 300 pixels per inch, things like that. That's important for things like printings and things like that. But when you work in Campaign Cartographer, you actually work in the real world unit. That means that if you're making a dungeon room, which is 10 by 10 feet, then you actually make that room 10 by 10 feet in Campaign Cartographer. You're not trying to work on miniature scale. For example, most role-playing systems use miniatures that use a 1-inch grid, and you use 5 feet per square. So that room would be 2 by 2 squares if it was 10 by 10 feet. So some people would immediately think, well, then that room is 2 inches by 2 inches because 1 inch per grid square. But you don't think that way in Campaign Cartographer 3 Plus. Just concentrate on the actual real world unit you are mapping. If the dungeon room is supposed to be 10 feet by 10 feet, well, then you tell Campaign Cartographer it is 10 feet. It's as simple as that. So it's not complicated at all, but you need to keep that in mind. And I won't hide this. There is a learning curve when learning Campaign Cartographer 3 Plus. If you're already experienced with CAD-like programs, that might be a very shallow learning curve. But if you're not, you will have to learn some new things. I'm not saying Campaign Cartographer is difficult, because it's not really difficult. It's only difficult if you go in with the mindset that I know how to do things in an image editor and I want to do it the exact same way in Campaign Cartographer. Then you're probably going to hit a wall rather quickly. But the learning curve is not that steep, and if you follow the established tutorials, for example the tutorials found in the user manual, or just follow along with this video series which I have for you here right now, that shouldn't be a problem at all. But when that is said, I have one major recommendation for you here, and that's learn to use the program first before you start your big projects. Usually the people who have the most questions, the most trouble, are people who just bought Campaign Cartographer. Then they have this idea that they're going to map this huge land or this fancy dungeon or whatever, and they just start out working in Campaign Cartographer and they ignore all the tutorials. They just start on their own map right away and just figure out, well, I learn as I go when working with my map. But that's really a very poor way of starting out, because first of all, you're probably going to do several things wrong in the beginning, which is going to cause trouble for you later on. You're going to use much more time and trying to figure out things, and you often work yourself into the wrong parts and figure out that this didn't really work out because things didn't work as you thought it would. The best way to start with Campaign Cartographer is to sit down and work through the tutorials in the manual, or if you follow a video series like this, follow along, do the map making yourself. Do not just watch me or anybody else do it, but actually sit down, follow the tutorials, try to repeat what you see or read in the program and work through it. And even if you're not interested in overland maps, a lot of people buy Campaign Cartographer with the Dungeon Designer add-on because they want to make dungeons for their game, or maybe they buy Cosmographer add-on because they want to make spaceships and space settings things for the game. And all of that is completely fine, and there's no reason you should make overland maps. But the manual for Campaign Cartographer starts with a tutorial doing overland maps, and that's what I'm going to do in this series as well. And what's very important here is that the same techniques that you learn for overland maps also apply for use in dungeons and things like that. There's a lot of things that are exactly the same in Campaign Cartographer if you map overland maps or if you make dungeon maps. So if you start out your life with Campaign Cartographer 3 Plus by actually doing the overland tutorials at the beginning of the manual, you will be so much more well prepared to make your dungeons or your spaceships later than if you just throw away the manual and say, well, I'm not going to make overland maps, so I'm just jumping into the spaceships immediately and start with that. Please do the overland tutorials. They are written to get you familiar with the Campaign Cartographer program. Learning overland mapping is just really a secondary part of those tutorials, but they go through and teach you a lot of the techniques you will need no matter what map type you are going to make. So please sit down, make some tutorial maps, get comfortable with the program before you jump to your own big project. That will make things much easier for you, and it's the recommended way of starting out with Campaign Cartographer 3 Plus. So okay, that's it for this video. In my next video I'm gonna start talking about the user interface in Campaign Cartographer 3 Plus. So thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.